So today's guest is Mr. Whiskey, a voice that meets life's darkest moments with honesty, depth, and unexpected humor. I first met him on the Podcasters Cruise last year, and we had the chance to spend even more time together this year on the newly named New Media Cruise. Mr. Whiskey is the host of A Couple of Nukes, a show that dives headfirst into the hard conversations to extract real-life lessons, build community, and help people leave better than they arrived. A U.S. Navy veteran, author, preacher, comedian, and speaker, he blends lived experience, faith, science, and comedy to make a space for healing, growth, and hope. From mental health, suicide prevention, to addiction recovery, relationships, mentorship, and purpose, one of my most important conversations. Mr. Whiskey creates a room for quiet voices to be heard, for real change to begin. Mr. Whiskey, welcome to Leading with Purpose.
Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Porteous. As you mentioned, we met from our time together, diving off the side of catamarans to having spiritual encounters at the taco bar together. We have definitely had our fair share of time together in person, and now we get to meet digitally. And I think that is just so amazing that, I always say podcasting allows global impact from such a small space. Whether you're someone, no matter your financial range, no matter your age, your gender, your race, whatever it is, podcasting is an independent, open platform that allows so many people to be heard and to connect. So I really love that, and I love what you do.
Well, same here. It is really fun that we got to meet on a Podcasters Cruise. That's what first brought us together, and ever since then, I've been wanting to have you on. And actually, when I first met you, I didn't even have a podcast. I created it after that. And I'm really excited to dive into yours. But before we get into that, I'm curious because you've worn so many different hats. As I mentioned, a Navy veteran, preacher, comedian, author, and now podcaster. How did those experiences shape your calling to have the kinds of conversations that you host on your show, Couple of Nukes?
For sure. I say that life, and especially once you become a podcaster, as a listener or a host, you are like a walking library where every experience is another book on the shelf that you have, access to and knowledge of. I think that life is about being a lifelong learner. We are always learning, and I think every day you should try to learn something new. And it doesn't have to be a huge, world-changing thing. It could be just as little bit as the latest scientific discoveries to new AI technology or just human culture and society. I think we should constantly be learning. And so the same thing with all our experiences build upon one another. And I like to say we recover loudly so others don't die quietly. And most importantly, our look back is someone else's look forward. So I like to look back at all I've been through, how it has all lined up and shaped me, to then provide that for other people to look forward. And as we get into leadership and parenting, unfortunately, you can try to provide your look back for someone and they don't always receive it well, or they just ignore it. I think we've all been in a position where as a child or teenager, we heard advice and we said, no, that's you, not me. And then later on, we come back around and have to give an apology, tail between our legs. But, I think the best thing we can do is always provide information minimum, right? We can't be a bystander. Provide the information, and ultimately, if they make the choice or not, you have done your part. I think it's so important that we do our part. We can't always control everything, but doing our part. And so to do our part, we need to first have ourselves not fully put together, but have enough things lined up where we can look back and say, like for me, the military was not a good time. To summarize it briefly, we had a lot of suicides, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of addiction issues, not just drugs, but to sex, to sleeping, to video games, to any mind-numbing coping device, and it was not a coping skill, it was a coping device. And those are two different things. And that's a whole conversation on its own. But going through that is kind of what inspired me to help others and work in that field. I didn't choose to go out of my way initially and say, hey, are you okay, sailor? It was people would come to me. They would say, Mr. Whiskey, we're going to tell you how we feel because you are respectful and you listen, and we don't know who else to go to. And that kind of developed into, okay, people are reaching out to me, but how many people out there aren't reaching out who need me to reach out? And I think that goes for everyone, whether you're in the military or a civilian. do your part to reach out, because not everyone is comfortable reaching out. And some people don't even know how to reach out. I've come to learn that one of the most important things about leadership is communication. And understanding communication is knowing that people don't know how to verbalize. And you could look at studies, children who grow up with less vocabulary education have a harder time with emotional regulation and expression because they don't have the scaling. If a kid only knows, undying hatred and rage and doesn't know about frustration, annoyance, and anger and this scaling, then they don't know how to express it. And you can take that into adulthood. And I think looking at the political landscape nowadays, we see a lot of people who aren't verbalizing, communicating. It's just, if we disagree, it's dead to me. And we need to get back to communication and verbalization. And that's why having podcast platforms like your show and mine are so important.
Well, that brings up a really interesting deeper dive for me into your podcast, which tackles a lot of heavy topics that a lot of people try to avoid. You just mentioned suicide, addiction. Well, why do you believe that facing the dark directly is essential for real growth and healing?
It was never even like a doubt or second thought for me. And so it's so strange. I had a gentleman come to me, pitch an idea to be on my show, talking about school shooting prevention and safety, security, and reanalyzing how we tackle that subject. And I said, of course, come on the show. He said, really? He said, Mr. Whiskey, you were one of the first hosts to accept me. Everyone else said this subject is too taboo. We're not going to talk about it. And for me, I never thought for a second like, oh, this is bad. Because in my mind, I said, we're not promoting school shooting, right? We're talking about how can we stop this? So why is that a bad subject? But unfortunately, some people there's a lot of avoidance in our world, in our personal lives as well, in our relationships. A lot of us deal with avoidance. That goes back into the coping, right? A lot of us, I think social media is a great, tool to use to have conversations like you and I are having, but a lot of people are using it as a coping device. People are just scrolling for hours, and they're not scrolling on educational content. They call it brain rot. I mean, how can you indulge in that and be like, wow,
doom scrolling?
Right, exactly. Such a negative connotation. But it's all about glamorization, right? So that's why people avoid that. They say, oh, I'm just going on social media, or it's my self-care, right? People glamorize it, right? Imagine we called smoking lung destroying. Hey, I'm going to go get a lung destroyer today, right? You were like, hold on a second. That doesn't make sense, right? So I think, but people have gotten so used to brain rot that they've taken the negative connotation away from it and made it like people call it self-care. And I think it's important to treat yourself and to relax, right? Even some of the most hardcore people on the planet talk about resting. And if you want to go in a biblical direction, even God talks about resting, right? So it's super important, but how you rest is even more important than when and why you rest. And so to bring it back to, about talking about dark subjects, I think avoidance has become so common. For me, like I said, I've talked about women's menstruation on my show, which a lot of guys don't talk about. They're not comfortable talking about that stuff. I've talked about male sexual assault awareness, molestation, and all kinds of stuff. And for me, it's never been like why should we talk about this? Is this too controversial, too taboo? For me, it's like people are suffering from this. Like, who cares about our personal pride or shit? Yeah, I'm sure there are people who call me gay or feminize me or say, oh, Mr. Whiskey's this or that because he's doing women's work and support. But their opinions are so not important compared to the people who are suffering, who need the information. So for me, it's always about the bigger picture. Who are we helping? But so many people get caught up on the small things. And to give you a really terrible real life example, a lot of the nuclear operators who end up committing suicide or staying in the program until they just can't anymore, it's all about personal pride and shame because people, the military in general, now I'm using nuclear operator field as my personal experience, but this goes for anything, Navy SEALs, Special Forces, or even if you're just aviation mechanics, whatever it is, there's so much shame around leaving the military. I guess you were weak, you weren't strong enough, or this and that, especially from your parents and the people closest to you, that people rather stay in the military until they commit suicide or just completely destroy their mental health than to go home. And people see it. I like this view of it's not quitting. It's you chose in an educated decision that you and the military were not a good fit for one another. And you made the educated and most beneficial decision to walk away for both your benefit and the military's benefit. Because at the end of the day, if people are committing suicide or not performing well due to mental health, you are not benefiting the military. And this goes for any job, really. I have seen people at civilian jobs push themselves to the brink of suicide, self-harm, or in worst cases, homicide, right? We've seen people kind of snap, and then their boss and their employees become part of a hit list. That goes back to other people's opinions over the bigger picture. So I think it's all about prioritization. So dark subjects, like, listen, I've talked about, so I have to have guests on my show give stories that brought me to tears or just a chill down the spine. And, for me, it's all about who are we serving.
That absolutely beautiful. And I'm looking for those who are watching or listening on the podcast and can't see it. Your background has a cross and then the nuclear symbol for an atom, and then below that a microphone for podcasting. I am curious because you've mentioned the military and you mentioned being in the nukes. Tell us a little bit about the background from a couple of nukes as the name of your podcast.
For sure. And just to go over the symbology, I like to have those three elements because it's about so many people have pitted faith and science against one another when they work in great unison. And if you look at all the science that is backed by the Bible or the Bible that's backed by science, like, it is so beautiful and a lot of stuff agrees. And then the microphone, of course, as a podcaster, but it's also about giving a voice to those who are unheard. I've had so many Vietnam veterans on my show who they told me stuff that you've never seen in any history book, that you've never seen in any program, right? And that's a thing too. So many people focus on the popular stories, the celebrities. There are so many regular people. I call them regular compared to celebrities, right? These people who live what some might call mundane lives, who have been through things you couldn't imagine. And some of these war stories, and I feel bad because a lot of the Vietnam veterans have this, again, people care so much about the political side of it that they forget, like, these were humans, a lot of whom were forced to fight and went through things that we couldn't even imagine. I've heard them tell their stories, and it sounds like a movie. It sounds like a fictional plot, some of the stuff they went through. I think providing that platform is so important. And to bring it back, Couple of Nukes was originally going to be just a comedy podcast, a couple of nuclear operators, and they call us Nukes for short. So a couple of nukes, just kind of BSing, talking about life. And really, it was based on such a small percentage of the American population can actually become a nuclear operator, because you have only about 1% of all the people who qualify to join the military go to the nuke school. And then the nuke school is a 3-part funnel system where from beginning to end, there are less and less and less people due to, unfortunately, suicide, mental health issues, academic struggles. And so if you start with 90 people, maybe 5 make it out to the fleet. Like, it is, as they describe it, drinking water from a fire hose. I don't recommend you ever try to do that. But if you have done that, then you understand it's difficult, right? It is about, 5 years of college within a year and a half, maybe 2 years, depending on how your program is tracked. But it's a lot. And so because of that, the people who make it to the fleet, these nuclear operators, they're such a small percentage of the population. And what I've noticed, and I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure y'all can think of someone, that the smarter you are, the stranger you are. And we've definitely seen some people in public who are really smart, but really strange, And historically, we've seen that as well with a lot of the great minds in history. And so the nuclear operators were a strange community. I don't say strange in a derogatory way. Their minds work differently. And so to people who don't have that same, working and workflow in their head, it's kind of comical because nukes are super, super technical. They will argue the most minute points. They are overthinkers. They lack common sense, but they're academically brilliant. And so every conversation with a nuclear operator is like you're in court, but it's so humorous to watch. And so I wanted to capture that because it was so unique. I was looking at, there's a lot of podcasts out there. I never saw just a couple of nuclear operators, hashing it out. And with that, I wanted to incorporate life advice and talk about the mental health struggles intertwined with the comedy. Because as you mentioned, a lot of people don't want to talk about this stuff. A lot of people think that it is too dark. There's a lot of different opinions as well. If I do men's health work, I've got on one side feminists who think that I am, perpetuating toxic masculinity. And then if you have on the other side, you have toxic masculinity people who think I am feminizing men. It's like there's such a balance to everything that no matter what, you're going to have opposition from both sides in whatever you do. And so I thought to myself, well, we intertwine comedy with this. It kind of eases that tension, right? And I wanted it to be balanced. So people on this side are laughing, people on that side are laughing, and then they can kind of still get the message, right? I mean, you look at fictional writing, movies, radio, whatever you listen to, it all has a message in it. Every song you've ever listened to on the radio, there's a purpose and message behind it. Some good, some bad. Same with TV shows, news programs, even podcasts. And so I wanted to make the message still deliverable, but to a wider audience. Unfortunately, it was one of those things, and I'm sure anyone listening who has had an idea, you realize our ideas are great to us, but not everyone's on board. Some people just can't see the picture. They just don't want to invest in it, even if it's free, right? I wasn't asking nuclear operators to pay me to be on the show, but I was asking them for their time. And in the nuke world, your time is so limited, that is worth, it's like gold bars. And so unfortunately, it ended up being, as I jokingly call the show, just a nuke. It's just me. And it's been that way ever since. And so I went in such a more serious direction by myself. I kind of just got more and more into the serious side of it, because the comedy was built off of multiple nuclear operators connecting. So without that part, it's just me. I'm still a funny enough guy, but for me, it was like, you don't have that group camaraderie. Let's just focus on the message. And so the message became more and more serious. And that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
I love that, because again, you take on very serious issues, very sometimes dark issues, things that, as you mentioned, are often polarizing. But I really appreciate the way that you blend faith. You got the cross there, the science, and you keep mentioning comedy, because bringing comedy even into faith, I think is really, really important, and science. I think bringing humor into science and bringing all these things together to help address these dark issues. But I'm curious, how do you see those elements work together to help people open up and actually hear what matters?
For sure. I just want everyone who is a follower of the show to know that Mr. Porteous is also a comedian. Don't let him trick you. He's done his fair share of comedy as well. So I just want everyone to know that. And,
I'm all serious, man.
Yeah. And I know that, I think a lot of times if you mention faith, you lose everyone else. If you mention just science, you lose everyone else. If you mention whatever, right? So I like to blend it together, because you get people from both sides, especially a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people aren't atheists or believers. They're kind of in between. I feel like our world is in such a back and forth when it comes to faith. A lot of people, most people that I talk to, they believe in God or Jesus Christ, but they were hurt by the church and they don't believe in the faith community. Or a lot of people, they believe in something, but they're not sure what. A lot of people, they believe in science, but they distrust the government, so they don't know how much science is true, right? There's just so much confusion and chaos in the world right now. And so I like to blend both to reach everyone. And I always say, at least for me personally, I will never argue with an atheist who has never read the Bible beginning to end, and I will never argue, against someone who is science-based without me reading all the scientific reports first. I believe that education and evidence is so important. And I know the word evidence scares some people who are believers, saying, evidence destroys faith. They can work hand in hand together, as long as the evidence is supportive of your faith and not the basis for it. That's a key difference. But for me, it's all about education. And I believe that educating believers on science and, atheists on faith, you can cover all those subjects in a way that brings more unity, because ultimately my goal is, and everyone's goal should be, human unification for peace across, all the nations. And it's hard and very difficult to do, especially, I mentioned in the very beginning, the polarization. People have described it as, especially in American politics right now, we have a huge dead man's land, no man's land, whatever you want to call it, right? Between one side and the other, where people aren't communicating. And that's why when I go back to communication and leadership, the most important thing you can do as a parent, a leader, a mentor is ask questions. Questions lead to answers. Answers lead to education, right? So it's always not instant punishment or instant praise. It's why did you do this? Or I'm curious, why do you feel that way? So many people just state their opinion, especially online on, social media platforms, and people just argue against it instead of saying, I'm curious, why do you feel that way about X, Y, Z, or ABC? It's all about the questions. And I think going back to faith and science, when you propose some science stuff, people are going to ask questions. When you propose some faith stuff, people are going to ask questions. And questions and answers are the basis for communication. And this is really important for, even if you're not a leader, just your relationships, for arguments with your spouse or when your kids are closed off from you and acting different. It's so important to ask questions.
We're coming out of the holidays, and for a lot of people, going back to family brings up a lot of triggers and wounding and different pieces. And for me, my theme for this year, you kept talking about curiosity, and my theme this year was around courageous curiosity about exactly what you're saying, about asking more questions, especially the people I love and disagreed with. And if you can understand why they're coming from there instead of just automatically judging them. None of us like to be judged, and one of the ways to do that is to stop judging people and start asking those questions. So I really love that you brought that up. And hearing you talk about your show, Couple of Nukes, actually feels less like a show and more like a gathering. You're really building the community. So I'm curious, this is the Leading with Purpose show. What does leading with purpose mean to you? And how do you intentionally create that space for your listeners?
For me, my purpose, as I've always put it, is to serve others, right? I think, and when everyone makes that purpose, then we're all serving one another. But unfortunately, it's hard to maintain that because there are some people who their purpose is to, serve themselves. And so it really topples down this whole system. But I think it's so important that we stay true to our purpose and our self-alignment. One of the issues, especially with each new generation, is that our purpose isn't coming from within or what we're aligned with. It's coming from social media. It's coming from mainstream media. It's coming from whatever we're listening and absorbing to. You've got 2-year-olds who are coming out of the womb and grabbing onto an iPad that is playing a message for them. And again, we talked about messaging earlier. It could be good or bad. But good or bad aside, here's the real question. Is that message in alignment with what that person wants? And at 2 years old, they don't know what they want. So their alignment is going to be, oh, okay, this is what makes sense. This is what I'm being told. For me, I am so glad that, what has sustained me in life is what you and I just talked about. I always called it intellectual curiosity, right? So for my journey of faith, for a personal example, I had a religiously abusive childhood. And, most people who went through what I went through, as I've talked to them, came out atheist or non-believing. A lot of church hurt, a lot of familial religious hurt, right? A lot of people have used religion, unfortunately, for weaponization and shame. But my intellectual curiosity saved me because I said, all these people are saying this, or all this online is saying this. What does the Bible itself actually say? I went to the source and did that research. And then I went beyond that source to more historical documents and other stuff, right? A lot of us, when we're faced with hurt or situations, or when it comes to our purpose, we don't go back to the source. We just look at all these things that are upfront and flashy in our face. And so I think it's so important to go back to the source. And when it comes to purpose, you have to truly think about your self-alignment and what you want. And maybe for me personally, my self-alignment is with the Bible and what it says. For other people, it might be, what is being a good human look like to me? Or, what can I do in my time to establish a legacy? And then it's like, what does that legacy look like? Is my purpose to leave the best life for my children, for their generation, for my community? Am I serving just Florida, or do I want to serve all of America? Do I want to go have a global impact somewhere? So I think it's so important to focus in on that and to brush aside all this other stuff that we're bombarded with. And for me, I've always just had serve others, because I think that as the Bible says, there is greater love, no greater love than this, that you lay down your life for others. And it doesn't just have to be in the physical martyrdom sense. It can be you and I right now hosting these podcasts. We're putting aside our time that we could be doing other stuff, right? So that is a sacrifice on its own. And in fact, it's one of the sacrifices that we can't get back. But for me personally, I get it back in the sense that I had someone write into the show and say, this episode changed my life. And that is what it's all about. And even if that was the only life ever changed by my show, that is one person I've truly served. And for some of us, that's more people served than some people. Some of us never, I've thought about, what if I quit podcasting and writing and I just sat home and played video games all day? And to me, that feels purposeless. Like, sure, it could be entertaining to me, but how? So what, you came here, did nothing and left? I mean, to me, it's just mind-boggling how anyone could just rot away unless they have some kind of, trauma that they're numbing. But if you felt like your purpose was just to have a good time, I don't know. I can't even wrap my mind around that. For me, like, my joy comes from serving others and all of us having a good time.
I love that. And I love, seeing you in your leadership and the way that you show up as a leader. So hearing you talk about what's important to you and being able to be open to everybody else, it's just beautiful. And I think it's really helpful, again, for all of us as aspiring leaders, and whether it's our community or family, there's lots of different ways to do that. I love the way that you shine your light. And I'm curious, on the other side, for somebody that might be listening for your leadership, and not just so much as them as an aspiring leader, but somebody who might be struggling silently. You talk a lot about being the voice for those that aren't heard, whether it's with a mental illness, addiction, struggling with finding their purpose or their identity. What's one message that you most want them to hear today?
The message I've been putting forward lately that's been on my heart has been, in Latin, is Dum Spiro Spero, which is actually very popularized in South Carolina. So if you look at their license plates or their merchandise, it says, "While I breathe, I hope." And one of the most powerful things ever said on my podcast was Douglas Brinker, 2-time suicide survivor, and he works in the veteran community for that kind of work. He said that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that really stuck with me. It was like an anchor just fell down on my chest. I was like, wow, that is so true. And in the moment, you're not thinking about that. I've definitely been there before. I've also worked in suicide prevention for a while to a personal level, where I had suicidal people show up at my room and I had to have those conversations with them. And, when I partnered it up with While I Breathe, I Hope, and I thought about, as long as you're breathing, that means you're here. You haven't made that permanent. And I don't even like the word solution, right? Because you haven't solved anything. It's just a permanent option, right? But while I breathe, I hope, what that means is, as long as you're alive, there are going to be other options, more options. And what I have to say is, I'm in touch with the reality of it is, while you're breathing and you have those options, they might not be the best options. They might not be the options you want. They might not be the options you need at the time or at the time you need them, but you're still alive and have options that can slowly line up towards what you need or want. And you take all those options away when you commit suicide. So I think it's so important to say, as long as I'm breathing, I'm still alive, and people say, well, Mr. Whiskey, what if I end up homeless or on the streets? You're still alive, and there are still options and opportunities for you to rebuild a life. And again, it might not be everything you initially imagined, but the subtitle of my show is, rebuilding our lives, rebranding our lives and rebuilding our dreams. And because, I've had plenty of dreams and, images for my life that didn't work out. I was left at the altar twice when I was supposed to get married. I moved to a state that was supposed to build a life, and then it wasn't here. I never thought I was going to go into the military. Then I got out. I never planned to be a podcaster, but everything has always worked out towards something. And the more in alignment with myself and my purpose, the more I've led with my purpose, the more everything has lined up towards that. I've been on the brink of homelessness before, of wondering where I'm going to live, and I've slept in my car before. It's not fun, but I'm still alive. And I've gotten to go on cruises. I've gotten to travel the world, and I've gotten to, most importantly, serve others to the point that people have, emailed me saying, you changed my life. And that's one of the things I want to talk about. For anyone who is aspiring to be a leader, looking for leadership, one of the best ways to learn is to teach, right? And I have found that, like Mr. Porteous, he called me a leader. And, I've never thought of myself as that way. But how did I do it? I just established it. I took the step saying, I'm going to be a leader, right? Like I said, I started my podcast when I was 20 years old. I was just leaving the military. I didn't know where I was going to live, what I was going to do. And I just started a podcast, not to be a leader, but just to have conversations. And then that led to now speaking on stage, to hosting this platform, and to having that impact. And I believe now, more than ever before, anyone has the power to be a leader and have such a greater impact. And it starts with going to a local charity event. Just showing up is step one. You know, you're not going to be head honcho day one, but by showing up and making your presence known, that's the first step. And then you, most importantly, with podcasting, with entrepreneurism, with anything you're doing for leadership, consistency is so important. Showing up again and again and again. And you might not always get the big opportunities to be a leader that you want, but leading in all the small ways. Because here's the thing. Everyone is a mentor. Whether you want to be a leader or not, you are a mentor because people are watching you, they are observing you, and they are learning from you. And they may be people who are watching you and you change your life and you never even knew it. And I'll wrap this all up with this quote. We are always planting the seeds of a tree whose shade we will never sit under, right? So many people are focused on the fame and the credit and the benefits. And what I do with serving others is I like to say we're planting the seeds of a tree whose shade we will never sit under. So, yes, I didn't get to sit under the tree, but guess what? Maybe generations and generations will. This conversation I'm having with you right now, Mr. Portis, this might be one that changes a life 200 years from now. You and I may be bioengineered and still alive, or we may be dead. But that impact is priceless. And so you never know what you're doing as an involuntary leader or as a voluntary leader, the impact it can have on people who never tell you that you impacted them.
That is absolutely amazing, beautiful. I'm sure that people will want to respond, and I encourage everybody that's listening, if you have comments that you want to share about what Mr. Whiskey has shared with us today, again, I am in awe of the way that you lead. I just really appreciate the integrity and just you being fully yourself. And I think that's one of the really great lessons that you teach by example, is to really know yourself and to really honestly love yourself so you can love others the way that you do.
Yes, sir. I agree. And, everything I do, I always lead from the heart, and so many people, I think, especially nowadays with social media, they are so focused on setting the scene, making the script, or having, AI assisted tools write it for them, or photoshopping this or that. And I think authenticity is so important as a leader. And I think there's a difference between authenticity and vulnerability that inspires and relates to doing it to the point that you belittle yourself. There is a balance to be had where you are an authentic and vulnerable leader, but you still curate that respect and that you aren't making a fool of yourself or of others. And I think that relatability is so important. And I think we're seeing a shift in culture, at least on the side of the industry that you and I work on, where people are getting sick of all these picture perfect photos, of seeing these picture perfect highlight reels of life. Like, we want to see the real. We want to relate. When it comes to comedy, just because, I work in comedy a bit, we always say relatability is the number one step in breaking that tension and having that humorous connection. It's about that's why comedians will make fun of themselves or talk about things that we can all relate to a degree, because it's about relatability. People want to know that you're a real person, right? Because a real person, we could look up to a leader that is this perfect robot, but we want that humanity aspect. And so much of that is being lost in this tech world. And I don't say that to be anti-AI or anti-improving your photos, but there's a balance to be had as well.
Well, speaking of relatability, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here at the last minute of the show. You do have a first name. We call you Mr. Whiskey, but we share the name Mark. And that's another thing that I appreciate us sharing in common. And I do respect you as Mr. Whiskey. Thank you so much for being here, being part of the show. And thank you so much for the work that you do on your show and being able to be a voice for the unheard. I'm honored and grateful to be your friend.
Thank you so much. And I return all of that to you as well as a fellow podcaster, as, you know, an author and a speaker. And I appreciate what you do. I think I always say so many people who come into the podcasting industry say, why would Mr. Whiskey and, you know, Mr. Porteous collaborate? They're kind of fighting for the same audience. You know what it's about? The more platforms we have, the more people we can reach. And for me, again, it's not about, did I reach someone? If someone listens to this and says, forget Mr. Whiskey, I just like Mr. Porteous, by all means, as long as he's the voice for you, you know, it's about, again, not the credit. It's about what happens afterwards. So anyone who leaves, you know, anytime people listen to my show and they say, we're leaving you for one of your guests, great. Because we are all unique people and we all need to hear things in a different way and listen to things in a different way. And I think the more platforms we have, the more people we reach. So I appreciate your platform and all that you do as well.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and look forward to connecting again real soon. Again, for you listening, we appreciate you showing up. We appreciate you listening. And if you want to share below, ask questions, I will put comments. I did forget to ask you, for people who want to reach out to you directly, where would they find you?
coupleonukes.com. So that's couple O and then nukes, nukes.com. That has all of my contact information, every episode of my show categorized for you to easily navigate the different topics, every guest who's ever been on my show, you know, and then just a bunch of information, free resources galore for you to take a look through. And again, the idea with my show and my website is that you go there and you leave improved, or you leave with the knowledge to help someone else. You know, again, it's not always about ourselves. Sometimes we hear a message and we're like, it's not for me, but it could be for someone you're going to meet or cross paths with. So always be sharing knowledge.
And I love that the way that you organize it. If you are also aspiring to get your voice out there as a podcaster, you definitely want to check out coupleonukes.com just to see the way that you have it structured. There's so many different ways to do it. But again, you've put everything into this as a form of service, and I appreciate you for that.
Yes, sir. And everyone listening, come join Mr. Porteous and I on the New Media Cruise this upcoming fall, where you can podcast and party with us as well.
Absolutely. If you're a podcaster, drop podcast in the comments. We'll talk to y'all soon. Bye now. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leading with Purpose. We hope today's conversation has inspired you to lead with purpose and make a meaningful impact. If you're ready to discover where you stand on your leadership journey, I invite you to take the Soulful Leadership Assessment. It's a powerful tool to help you align with your leadership style and your true purpose.